static. This is normal in the economic literature on electricity markets. We know that despite the advantages of an integrated renewables in the market, there is a trade-off when choosing how to support renewables through FIP or through FIT systems. So, to conclude, to attain the socially optimal level of investments in renewable capacity, it is necessary that firms internalize the market value of their renewable generation. How? By remunerating renewable electricity with a constant subsidy which is independent of market prices. FIT are enabled to implement the optimal outcome. FIP systems lead firms to internalize the market value of their renewable generation by exposing them to market prices. So it encourages investment in plants whose generation profile correlates with periods of high electricity spot prices. FIP firms have incentives to make their decisions based on forecasts of the evolution of market prices. However, as in general, spot price is not exactly the value of electricity for society, exposing renewable generators to market prices, although necessary, is not sufficient to for the implementation of the optimal outcome. So, concluding, the socially optimal investment in renewables can only be attained if the subsidies under FIP are set at the level that induces firms to internalize the externality associated with renewable generation. And this result according to our studies, holds even in the presence of carbon pricing, because several externalities may not be priced through these instruments due to crowding out of fossil fuel-based generation. So, although FIP can lead to more efficient renewable investment decision, there is a high probability the system induces firms to adopt day-ahead bidding strategies, and these strategies will reduce consumer welfare. For each market, there is still a huge amount of work and evaluation of costs and benefits, and something is real and serious, that there is nothing worse than sudden changes in regulation, because this is a terrible sign for investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, for this challenging question you have submitted to us and for discussion also. Is there any clarification question at this stage? So I propose to invite Markus Graebig to join us, and thank you, Isabel, at the floor to give a presentation. Markus, you are working for 50 Hertz company, and we are working on a project named WINDNODE. We are very interested in knowing what is WINDNODE, and I suppose you will explain that. You have been working in the past with prestigious partners, with Georg Erdmann in the Technical University of Berlin, at Cambridge also. So you have plenty of background which will be interesting for your presentation. Thank you for explaining us what is WINDNODE, notably. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Christophe, for the kind introduction, and thank you so much to Reinhard Haas for the kind invitation to be here today. It's a great pleasure. I'm going to explain to you in a second what WINDNODE is. I was glad to hear from Fatih this morning when he was talking about wind and solar transformation, and he said, I put down this quote, system integration is key. And that's basically the bottom line about what WINDNODE is. The acronym WINDNODE stands for a very nice and a catchy German phrase, which is wind energy as a contribution of northeastern Germany to the energy transition. You may have guessed that. So WINDNODE basically is a joint effort of around about 70 partners from northeastern Germany, 6 federal states involved, partners from academia, from industry, from think tanks, together with the federal government, who launched something which is intended to be one of the landmark projects of the next step of energy transition. So let me start by giving you a very brief introduction on the context in Germany. What is energy transition? Very briefly, and then I'm going to lead to the setup of WINDNODE and what we're trying to do to work on the system integration of renewables. That is an overview of how the electricity mix developed in Germany since 2000 until now, more or less until now. What you can see in this diagram is basically, so the bottom two, that is lignite, and it's that inglorious German record of being the world's largest producer of lignite, then hard coal, gas, nuclear, and renewables. So what you can see from this chart is basically that the amount or the percentage of coal has remained more or less stable, and the success of the energy transition so far was replacing nuclear by renewables on balance. The story about nuclear is quite entertaining. There was a first consensus about nuclear phase out in 2001. Then discussion came up around about 10 years ago about phasing out the phase out, which actually happened in 2010 after re-election of Merkel. And then after the very unfortunate event of Fukushima, public and political opinion shifted again, and we decided to phase out, the phase out of phase out. And that is what now has become one of the key parts, and probably one of the German unique German ways about going the energy transition. I just had the opportunity to visit colleagues in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, who told me they're taking just the opposite approach, phasing out coal first and then nuclear second. Well, anyway, so what we've achieved so far is round about 1/3 of our electricity mix from renewables. And those renewables, we have a little more than 100 gigawatts of installed capacity in renewables. And of these 100, I believe it's 104, something like that, round about 85% are wind and solar, so intermittent renewables. And by the way, the peak load in Germany is something around 80 gigawatts. So there are 2 or 3 challenges which come up for what we consider the second phase of energy transition. First one is dealing with or coping with the specifics of intermittent renewables, namely wind and solar, and how do we integrate them into the grid. Second one is the challenge about decarbonization. Not only in the electricity mix, but also beyond, and that's what what we call sector coupling. I believe that that term isn't so common in English, but it's basically the idea of coupling the electricity sector with mainly heat and transportation. And the third one is a whole list of exciting questions about new business models, about market design. We're in a process which is also called Energy Market 2.0, where the regulatory framework is massively changing and where energy companies and many others are wondering about what the new business models are going to be. So that's like the framework in which we're operating. That's a very brief overview of what the underlying government funding program that I mentioned, that idea of the flagship program for energy transition is doing. There has been a competition over the last 2.5 years to set up large-scale model regions which actually solve as something like real-world laboratories. Where solutions for this system integration of renewables can be implemented and tested and demonstrated. And we were lucky enough to be among the winners of one of these. So our consortium is the whole Northeast, which is in green here. There are 4 others. Well, at this point, my special thanks to my former boss, Georg Erdmann, who provided the environment at TU Berlin, where we actually had the creative space to think about something like that and really develop it over 2 years and bring all these partners together. So, like I said, the challenge is how do we cope with intermittent sources at a large scale. Government is supporting these projects with around about €250 million over 4 years. Why do we believe that this northeastern German region is particularly interesting for that challenge? First of all, it can be considered as one complete energy system. So we're operating in the region of one of the 4 transmission system operators of the country, 50 Hertz Transmission, who has now become my employer. It's a region with around about 16 million people, 6 federal states, and we're already, even in the German context, a frontrunner for green electricity. Half of the electricity mix in that region is already renewable. But we're also facing problems and massively facing problems which aren't that present in other places of Germany. First of all, trouble with grid congestion. There are redispatch and also renewable curtailment measures almost every day. And there is specific cost burden. So grid fees in that region are by far the highest in Germany, around about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, which also brings up questions about social justice and social acceptance and all kinds of things. So who is WINDNODE? That's an overview of that's an overview of some of our partners. The 30 associated partners are missing on that chart. So these are only the partners who are actually sponsored by the government, and it's a co-funding, so they do have to contribute private money. You do see many of the usual suspects, such as the TSO, there are a couple of DSO, distribution system operators, such as Stromnetz Berlin and WEMAG and others. There are big industry, big production, such as Siemens, BMW, and others. There are also some surprising partners, Lidl and Kaufland. For those of you who know the German retail market, those are among the biggest supermarket chains. So interesting to have them in such a project, and a great selection of some of the best academic institutions in that region. So one of the first learnings is about such a project which actually has evolved as a, if you will, as a grassroots activity. There wasn't one mastermind who said, this is the plan and I'm picking my partners. But in early 2015, there was the idea, okay, there's going to be some government funding out there, that's also always helpful. But there was that initiative of a couple of partners who said, that's a great catalyst to start thinking together about how this new energy system and how integration of renewables could actually look like. So lots of these partners came together, and it's challenging to organize such a process, but it's also very rewarding because you learn a lot from all these discussions, and this term of cross-industry innovation comes up because if you talk to partners like Lidl and Kaufland and others which aren't part of the usual community, you get some very cool new ideas. But for example, talking to them about parking lots in front of supermarkets. I've never thought about that this could be one key approach to integrating more electric vehicles in cities. Why? Because at night the parking lots are all empty. A cool idea, right? And people have trouble finding parking in the city. So why not create incentives to park in these empty spots? Also an incentive for the supermarket because people will buy their sandwiches in the morning and so on. So lots of cool discussions which come from this very heterogeneous and colorful selection of partners. So that's how we're working. And like I mentioned, we just started in January this year. So for now, I will basically present to you how the project is set up and some very first intermediate results. And if we meet again in 1 or 2 years, we will be able to present you a whole range of real results. So we're organized in 9 working packages. And the idea is to reflect something that we consider a complete value network, if you will, of the future energy system. Number 1, 3, and 5 are the connecting levels. 3, efficient grids, that's like traditional physical grids, ideas about smart grids and such. ICT platform, that bundles a whole range of ideas about what kind of information communication technology is needed to organize such a system of 1.7 million prosumers. One of the projects within that ICT platform is the flexibility platform driven by 50 Hertz, which is one approach towards the smart market discussion and about how to deal with regional flexibility in order to ease grid congestion. And then market design and regulation. Very exciting part about, first of all, looking at the new energy market 2.0 from a very German perspective, find out what the new roles are, which are actually laid out by the government, test them in reality and develop recommendations for the further design of markets and electricity design. And one fun fact, we also we even got our specific regulatory exception for these projects because for example there is a rule that for industry and large consumers, the way their grid fees are calculated, there are incentives to have a very flat consumption, which is a major hindrance if you think about flexibility steered by wind and PV and such. And to put that into numbers, one aluminum company told me they're currently paying around about 5 million euros in grid fees per year, and if they only get one peak in their demand curve, it could go up to 35 million euros. I didn't verify that numbers, but it seems to be plausible. And these are problems which this regulatory exception help us to cope with in this experimental environment. So we can really think about solutions which make sense from a system perspective and then talk about regulation later. We focus on large consumers, so demand-side management, that's a bit misleading. That's basically businesses such as these roundabout 1,000 supermarkets of Lidl and Kaufland. Flexible industrial demand is Siemens, BMW and such, and neighborhoods. And this storage part is really about sector coupling mostly. So the idea of power to heat, power to mobility. Last slide, given time constraints, last slide. What are we trying to find out? And it's really 3 topics we're focusing on. First one is, and this lovely picture here, that's almost self-explanatory, but that's more or less geared towards a general public, which shows the balance between generation and consumption, so nothing new to you. So let's focus on that side. 3 key topics. First one, flexibility, and that includes that we have a structured approach at different consumers, such as Lidl Kaufland, such as Siemens, where we identify a technical potential for flexibility. And the surprising first result from Siemens, for example, is that they found much more than they expected, by a factor of 300%, something like that. And by the way, they told me, doing that exercise of going through their factories, 4 factories included, and identifying flexibility options, they also learned a lot about the energy system in general, which led them to a reduction of waste in their production. So people are all happy, even if they don't even sell that flexibility, but that process was already very helpful. Well, second step, activating flexibility, that's the complex one, that's thinking about business models and which way to use flexibility. I'm going to skip these 2 for time reasons. Integration into the energy market 2.0. I already pointed out, talking about the regulatory side. I do want to mention making use of new data, and I was interested to hear from Fatih this morning that the R&D expenditure of the top 3 IT companies is even bigger than all R&D in clean energy. But why don't we ask the question, talking about smart meters and so on, we usually only consider these IT systems as enablers, but we try to also ask the other way around, what new value could be created by looking at all that data created in the energy industry. Seems to be a very open field. And last but not least, and that's, I love that one, so allow me to finish with that one, the idea of participation and dissemination. And it's not only this sanity check for acceptance of energy policy, but we really believe it's an element of creating new opportunities on a regional level for those companies and people involved. So looking at opportunities in exporting solutions and getting people involved. And it's also a perspective about storytelling, because we often see that that the energy industry in general, for all of us, it's most exciting. But for outsiders, the energy industry and also energy transition is a very complex thing, a low involvement thing, we would say in marketing. So why is it that case? Someone compared the German energy transition with the American moon landing. I love that picture, because both of them, energy transition and moon landing, are great challenges. But moon landing was fascinating to people. Energy transition isn't. So we do use this project to also invest into better storytelling and involving people on a level to show them this is exciting, this creates opportunities. It's not only an environmental mandate to save the climate, which is important enough, but there's much more in it. So we're building up 20 to 30 showcases, which will be available in 1 or 2 years, which you can actually visit, where you can learn about these solutions, get involved. And I think that's it for now. And we have another 3.5 years to go, and I would be most happy to talk to you about first or more results in 1 or 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus. I invite all the panelists to join me for the question, please. So as a transition, is there any question for Markus for clarification in this project? And if no, we can jump to the question for all the panelists. Please, if you have any question, identify yourself and address the person you want to address the question to. Please. You need a there is a microphone here.
Oh. Hi, this is Francisco Muñoz from Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez in Chile. And this question is for Audun. So you talk about scarcity pricing in Texas using the operating reserve demand curve. And I was wondering if you know how things have been worked there since they implemented it. Are generators complaining that they can't cover their fixed costs? Or do you know if there are other ISOs that are thinking about moving away from capacity mechanisms and putting more money into scarcity pricing?
So it's been in operation since 2014 in Texas. Prices or price increases due to this scarcity mechanism has been relatively limited so far, except from a few occasions. Now, that is because there has been sufficient supply, basically. There hasn't been a lot of scarcity. Now, we have seen investments taking place in the meantime in the market, which does indicate that this sends a signal to investors in the long run. So, and also Texas has increased the price cap in the market gradually along the way. So, to my knowledge, they plan to continue along this path. Now, in terms of other ISOs, to my knowledge, they are not the ones that currently have capacity markets are not considering to remove them, but there is still work on improving scarcity pricing to sort of reduce the role of capacity markets in the long-term investment perspective.
Okay, so we have 3 questions. One at the back of the room first.
Hello, my name is Carsten Neuer from the German Institute for Economic Research. And for Isabella, a question. You characterized this discussion on how do we want to provide support for renewables moving potentially towards some fixed feed-in premium. Now, I think we've discussed... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry. We've discussed throughout the morning the stronger transition that is happening over the next decade or two. And so I'm struggling with the idea of feed-in premia in the way that it shows investors today's price profiles that are relatively flat and then a premium on top of this. I do not really see how a feed-in premium will give sufficiently strong incentives for system-friendly technology choices, whether this might be shifting your solar panels more to the morning or evening or having less power in your wind turbines. So I wonder whether, in light of the transition objective that we have to move beyond feed-in premiums as a static economic efficiency instrument.
Yeah, thank you. If I have understood well your question, I think when technologies are considered mature, of course they should enter the market. Okay, fully integrated in the market. But the question is, and we are studying that problem, is that this is perhaps a very simplistic way of saying things. Because most of the markets have companies that own conventional plants and also renewable plants. We have also, and that's a reason why some colleagues of us are keeping telling that, okay, now markets are no longer, or most of markets, or some of the markets are not longer oligopolies, but are more imperfect markets, but not so imperfect as they were. In fact, this is not completely true. Why? It's fundamental to see which are the companies, the firms that own also renewable plants. Which are? They are strong, not so strong. More than that, what about the cross-investment, cross-ownership between companies? Apparently, you see a company that has nothing to do with conventional or renewables. But in fact, they are quite involved. They have cross investment and cross ownership that sometimes goes through 2 or 3 firms in the middle. Worst of all, that all this interferes with what we expected would do the best way too. Sometimes, and I think this is crucial to evaluate, is that concentration level is still in the energy field mostly seen by Brussels based on country level. This can't be no more. No more. No more. Because in fact, you can have a country with no problems of market power, but in fact, as this company has cross investments in other countries, you can have it. Okay, this is more serious when you have no constraints, grid constraints, problems of grid congestions, very serious. Okay, this is there. You have problems. There you can have problems. This is an economist, pure economist point of view. But in fact, if we concentrate only on technical points, we are losing, completely losing the core of the business, the electricity business. And we say electricity or others, but the electricity business is so mature and inside so rich and has quite an accumulated knowledge that may give us some surprises. On the other side, and please forgive me a last comment, we are putting, and in my mind, but we are putting quite a lot of attention on the customer, on the client, and we are right. But on the planning, on energy planning, we are supposing that prosumers, for instance, are getting much faster, are acting much faster than they really are. And that's another point that disturbs the market and can introduce problems in the market. Okay, I can go further if you know on the point you have on the coffee break, because I have publications on that and we can further. Okay.
Thank you very much, Isabel. There is a question at the first line here, first row. Somebody has a microphone? Okay, here. Thank you.
Michael Pollitt, Energy Policy Research Group at Cambridge. Thank you all for your comments. Can I ask you to reflect on a sort of fundamental point, which is that how do we correct the long-term investment and pricing signals in the energy sector? Because we're moving from a system which is now not driven by the marginal fuel cost, but is now driven by these long-term capital investment costs. And that requires a fundamental redesign of long-term investment signals. And I haven't really heard you talk about how you redesign the long-term investment signals, because we can see at the moment that the short-run signals, yeah, you can get those right, but they create massive arbitrage opportunities for different actors within the system if you get them wrong. But we still haven't addressed this long-term signals point, which has to be, has to have a fundamental market redesign about how you get that working.
Sorry. Could you repeat? I was convinced that it was not for me. Briefly.
So I think the question is, If we're moving to a system which is all driven by capital costs rather than marginal fuel costs, that requires a different type of market design. One would imagine you need long-term contracts with customers to back off the long-term investment costs, and you can't have a system driven by short-run pricing signals.
Yeah.
Please go straight to the point, if possible, to be short now.
You are talking about an item, a hot item, contract. And in this moment, there are several authors that are recommending that, they are in some kind of plants, of the renewable plants, still a high degree of uncertainty, a high degree of risk. If we are not subsidizing, let's say by feed-in tariffs, a way of incentivize to invest is through contracts. Okay. This is a way that, for instance, in Brazil exists. And in Europe, there's at least for some solar PV, large investments in larger PV is broadly discussed. Okay, in principle, what can we see is some kind of, incentivizing not through money in the investment or diminishing risk on the operating level, but even so, we are introducing damage on the market. Let's say that is a trade-off. There is always a trade-off. You contract, and of course, what is contracted is not in the market to be traded on the market.
Audun would like to comment.
Yeah, just a brief comment. So I think your question indicates that a fundamental redesign is necessary. I think the jury is still out there whether that is actually the case. I mean, you can show theoretically that with scarcity pricing, if you get that sufficiently often, then you still maintain adequate investment signals. But of course, you get a much more extreme situation, right? So the other path is to switch to more like long-term fixed contracts, maybe like you have for your mobile phones, for instance, in the United States. So I think it's room for many suggestions and alternatives there.
There is the last question. Can you please introduce yourself? And
Sure. Farhad Bilamoria, Australian Energy Market Operator. And this is a question for all the panelists. In managing renewable integration in Australia, we're seeing a couple of issues. One is the intermittency issue, which has been discussed here. The other issue is maintaining synchronism and power system stability. That doesn't seem to be as much discussed because it's historically been assumed and often provided by large generators with rotating inertia. What are you guys seeing, or what is everybody seeing in terms of new market designs for power system stability and especially frequency response?
Short answers, please.
Okay, I can go first from the US perspective. Two things relevant to that at least are happening on the market side. Pay for performance for regulation, frequency regulation, and they are considering to introduce a market for primary frequency response.
Well, we do already have a market for balancing power in Germany. Right now, it does work better than expected. When I was a student of electrical engineering around 2000, they told us more than 25% of renewables is physically impossible on the grid. Well, it does work, but it is part of the ongoing discussion how to further develop the system. The smart market discussion is part of it, and many of that is really work in progress, I would say. No easy answers right now.
Maybe 2 points on that. The first point is we have done also an analysis on this topic. How can renewables provide also to these topics of frequency response? And what we found out, and what is quite interesting, is that it would be useful to integrate them, and that only about 20 to 30% of the total capacity installed is necessary to provide this issue. This is the first comment on that. For future years. And the second comment is, if you look at the markets today, more or less, and look at battery systems, there was the trial to include more battery systems that the grid operator wanted to have, because more or less it's necessary for stable grid operation. So the grid operator didn't want to have that much battery capacities in. But now, more or less, we have started with some trials. There are some trials in Germany where battery capacity is included, and it's working quite well. So I would say in the long term there will be an answer from technology side as first exercises show good results.
Germany. It's only for Germany.
No more
questions concerning Germany? Only?
It's general.
In general. Okay. First of all, I think that, in fact, it's not that energy policy went faster than sometimes some way of seeing markets under an intelligent perspective. And so I think that the increasing part of renewables, I see it mostly in the Southern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, for instance. We have quite a lot of possibilities, but it's creating this moment very, very serious problems to the incumbents. And that's sure, once more, talking about markets, they are claiming for both the incumbents and other companies are claiming for contracts, are claiming that they are not, they have no rentability, no acceptable rentability. And so I think that energy planning must change. We must consider seriously changing market design, seriously seeing what is wrong, and for instance, in the Iberian market, the MIBEL, the spot market, the spot market has no cap and trade. It has a cap and trade, and even so, we have serious problems. So this is a holistic way of seeing things. This is my opinion.
So we have listened 4 different interventions of the different panelists with different point of view, different approach, different methods. So I would like to thank them and to thank Isabel, Markus, Dominik, and Audun of these excellent presentations. Thank you very much.